The Cyclops are quite interesting. The one-eyed Cyclops that we find in the Odyssey. According to Greek tradition, Cyclops were actually the artisans of the gods. We also find Cyclops in Lycia, which is extremely interesting because Lycia is closely linked with Byblos.
So what if Homer's giants weren't just mythical monsters? What if the Cyclops, the Lystrygonians, and the legendary heroes of the Odyssey preserve ancient memories of the same giant traditions found in the Bible? Today, in the 9 Ages, Dr. Willem McLeod explores whether the Nephilim left their footprints not only in scripture, but in the greatest epic of ancient Greece. So, Willie, before we compare Greek mythology with the Bible, could you give our audience a brief overview of the Odyssey and explain why this ancient story is still so influential today?
Yeah, so the author Homer, he is the oldest of Greek poets, and he wrote a story about the Great Trojan War in the Iliad, and also the story of Odysseus, the king of Ithaca, who after the Great Trojan War, on his journey back to the island of Ithaca, which was located off the western coast of Greece, it took him about 10 years to travel along that route. Now, the route that he took, to this day, scholars have quite a bit of, differences and different opinions as to how he traveled. But it seems that he used stories and tales of voyages that visited regions beyond the known world of the Greeks. For example, the Argonauts and the Argo, their tradition about them, he actually mentions them in his stories. And they traveled also very much the same route. It seems that the Odyssey is sort of, to some extent, elements of the Odyssey are based on the travels of the Argonauts and other ancient tales about voyages, seafarers that went to the northern areas, the Black Sea area, up the Danube, etc., and so forth. And so these magic tales and marvelous stories and so forth, it's part of a very old ethos, I believe, a very old storytelling tradition among the Greeks. So that's why it's so fascinating. And even to this day, if one do a great sea voyage, is even just a great voyage is often described as an Odyssey. It's such a marvelous, story about these unique and strange adventures that he had along the way. Yeah. But what is interesting for our discussion is obviously the creatures and the different strange personages that he actually met along the way.
And the wonderful thing is, where he encounters monsters, giants, sorceresses, sea gods, and supernatural beings. And I think the most important thing is that it preserves the worldview of an ancient civilization that believes the earth had once been inhabited by these mythical creatures. Yeah. So Willie, the Nephilim aren't mentioned in the Odyssey. Why do some researchers see connections between Homer's giants and the biblical Nephilim?
So the biblical Nephilim were actually located in the area of Canaan. That's in the later tradition. We're not talking about the story in Genesis, time of the flood, before and after the deluge, but now we're talking about the time when the Israelites conquered the land of Canaan and when they discovered and found these Nephilim inhabiting the land. So in this case, they are linked with the so-called Anakim. They are called the Anakim, and they resided in the land of Canaan. Now, we have good reason to believe that the stories about the Anakim and these Nephilim were also taken by migrants, and even these very same peoples that inhabited these regions towards other areas of the Mediterranean region. In my second book of the Nephilim, the second volume of the trilogy, I go into quite some detail about these migrations. And one interesting group is the Anakim. Let me just say about this name. It's also called the sons of Anak. And
Yes.
I've argued that Anak is actually a distortion of Enak or Enki, where it's just the vowels changed a bit. And so it's then the seed or the sons of Enki. We've discussed that in some detail previously. So they are actually then this tradition was, in my opinion, brought from the Persian Gulf region. Herodotus actually tells how these migrants came via the southern sea route from the Persian Gulf via the Nile Delta to establish themselves along the Canaanite coast. And it's here at Byblos and also at Ugarit and these regions that we find a people that's quite similar to the Anakim of the Bible. Because Anakim has also been connected with the wearers of necklaces or of neck rings. And these people, they're found here in archaeology going back to about 2000 BC at Byblos and also at Ugarit and some other places in that area, were known for their neck rings. It's quite interesting. And what is, they were called porteurs de toques. It's just a French expression for the wearers of rings, neck rings. And what Herodotus actually says is that these people, immediately when they settled in Canaan, they started undertaking long journeys. Now, those long journeys would take them further westward and going through the same regions that Odysseus visited, going through the Sea of Marmara, the Dardanelles, the Sea of Marmara, into the Black Sea and up the Danau, etc. And in these mining areas, neck rings were discovered of exactly the same type as those that we find in Byblos and Ugarit, but dating slightly later. So we have archaeological evidence that the same people associated with the Anakim were later on also involved in Europe and the areas visited by Odysseus on his famous journey. Yes.
Very, very interesting. Something when you talk about this always pops into my mind is the fact that a lot of these cultures initially developed independently, yet they have the same stories, the same memories, that keeps bubbling up.
Yes.
Yeah. But Billy, are the Cyclopes and the Lystrygonians simply mythical creatures, or could they preserve distorted memories of ancient giant traditions?
The Cyclops are quite interesting. The one-eyed Cyclops that we find in the Odyssey. According to Greek tradition, the Cyclops were actually the artisans of the gods. They were metal workers, builders, etc. And it's possible that the one eye was connected with the metalworking tradition of closing one eye to protect the eye in close proximity to the fire, etc. So that's probably where that tradition originated. We also find Cyclops in Lycia, which is extremely interesting because Lycia is closely linked with Byblos, the very land or the very place that we've just discussed. So there was a Babylonian king, Abishem. He lived in about 1800 BC. And he mentions at the obelisk temple in Byblos, there's an inscription of him. And he mentions a certain Kakun, a son of the Lycian. So showing connections between these people, which were called the Retinue, and who are so closely linked with the giant traditions and with the Anakim, and Lycia. Now, in Lycia, we find also traditions about the Cyclops. And what is interesting about these Cyclops is that they were great builders. We, for example, find that they were said to have built the citadel of Tyrants in Greece. There was one of the royal house, Brutus, he was one of the royal house of Argos, and he took refuge in Lycia, and then when he came back, he brought 7 Lycian giants with him called Cyclops.
Yes.
And now what is interesting is Lycia was known for a tradition about giants. Miletus, the city of Miletus, the king that ruled there was called Anax. And many scholars have proposed that Anax is just an equivalent for the Anak or the Anakim of the Bible, the similar peoples. And he had a son, Asterius, and according to Pausanias, the geographer, he was measured actually 10 cubits. So he was a man of about 4 meters in this tradition. So here we have close connections between the Cyclops and of Lycia and Canaan and the Anakim. The same can be said about the Laestrygonians. Now, Odysseus came across them on his way to the northern regions where he encountered the Cimmerians. Now, the Cimmerians lived at that time in the Crimea Peninsula, in the Kars region. I also visited that region before the Russians took control of it. Beautiful area. But anyhow, when Odysseus, now I must again say that parts of the Odyssey seems to be based on the story about the Argonauts. And where he finds the Laestrygonians is very similar to what happened with the Argonauts. And they found them actually at the southern coast of the Sea of Marmara. So these giants, man-eating giants, maybe a sort of reflection of such gigantic beings inhabiting these northern regions, as I've already mentioned, the Anakim having traveled to that very same regions. And this is actually where they were then encountered in these regions. What is interesting about the Odyssey is that these people are actually said to have been located where nightfall and morning tread so closely on each other's heels.
Beautifully said. Yeah.
Beautiful expression, yeah. And most Greek authors actually link that to the northern polar region. So they were sort of associated with the distant north. And as I've mentioned, these gigantic beings, like, for example, the Cyclops, were also connected with metalworking traditions, especially in Europe.
It's
in
interesting
the Alps,
because
mountains.
They apparently forged Zeus's thunderbolt, Poseidon's trident, and Hades'
Yes.
So
absolutely.
Fascinating. So they were skilled craftsmen. Any comment around?
That's where those rings were actually discovered. This very same neck rings that we find in Byblos and in Ugarit. Yes. If you are enjoying the podcasts and would like to explore these topics in more depth, you might enjoy my books. Book 1 of the trilogy covers the early period we're discussing right now and goes into much greater detail. You can find all my books on Amazon. Thanks for your support.
So any comment around the fact that, in Greek mythology, they believe that they were the sons of Uranus and Gaia, so sky and earth?
In general, the giants, the gigantes of Greek tradition, were regarded as the offspring of Uranus. He was actually castrated by his son Kronos, and his blood fell on the earth, the earth. In this case, Gaia in the Greek tradition, and the giants, the gigantes, were born from that. So it's clearly the very similar tradition, based on the same ancient tales.
So this is the interesting one. Greek mythology is full of demigods and born from gods and humans. The fallen sons of God. How does this compare with the sons of God in Genesis 6?
So there are a lot of opinions about the sons of God in Genesis 6, but we've discussed that many times on this program. And I'm of the opinion that, as we find in Psalm 82, that the sons of God, it's actually a very old term. We also find it at Ugarit. I've just mentioned Ugarit. In the Ugarit texts, the sons of God are mentioned as the sons of El. So it's an old term, it's not a later term used by the Israelites. It was a very old term. And in that case, it was typically used for the gods. And we find the same in Psalm 82, where we read that you are gods, you are sons of the Most High. And the Most High is just God, another name for God, El Elyon. And the sons of God, in this case, is just the children of El Elyon. So it's the very same term that we find here, equivalent term, and they are called gods. They were the gods. So we've seen in ancient Sumer where these traditions originated during that early period, before and after the deluge. We've discussed the House of Uruk in great detail in the previous episode, and their links to the Nephilim and how they were viewed as Nephilim, as the scions of the gods. So these very similar traditions, these same traditions actually, later on, were taken to the Mediterranean region. And in Greece, we find quite a few personages, both men and women, descended from both gods and goddesses. The greatest of these demigods were Hercules. Hercules, he was the son of Zeus. Perseus, he was the son of Zeus. Dardanus, the forefather of the house of Troy, he was a son of Zeus. And some were sons of Poseidon and other gods and goddesses and so forth. But this, in my opinion, there's no doubt that it's similar traditions. It's actually traditions that were brought from Mesopotamia via Canaan to the Mediterranean region. And this is why this is basically just continuation of the Nephilim tradition, as I discuss in great detail in the second book of the Nephilim trilogy.
And the second book I can just mention is The Nephilim and an Unholy Brood and its Secrets and Enigmas of an Ancient Mediterranean Race.
Yes.
But I do have one other comment, and it's interesting that in Greek mythology, these unions, let's say Zeus that repeatedly have children with mortal women, in Greek mythology, it's being celebrated. In the Bible, it's being condemned. So there's that
absolutely
that reversal. Yes. So Willie, when our friend Odysseus visits the underworld, he meets legendary heroes from a forgotten age. Does this reflect a wider ancient belief that an earlier world was ruled by extraordinary beings?
So Odysseus, he traveled through the Strait of Marmara into the Black Sea and eventually arrived at the land of the Cimmerians. That's the Curse Peninsula. And there he brought some offerings at the halls of Hades. And then these spirits of the dead arose, and eventually one of them was Hercules himself. And he actually says something quite interesting. We read in the Odyssey that he only saw the spirit of Hercules, whereas the real Hercules were on Mount Olympus. Remember, he became a god. He's the only among all the demigods that became truly divine. That's Hercules. Now, this figure of Hercules, as I show in my second volume, goes back to Naram Sin, that great Akkadian god emperor, who was also of Nephilim descent. and was the very first to have been worshipped as a god during his own lifetime. And we'll come back to that and discuss that. But these traditions were taken from Mesopotamia via Canaan to the Mediterranean region. And indeed, we do read that Odysseus encountered these spirits at the halls of Hades in the north, in the Kers Peninsula.
Yeah, and it's Sumerians have the divine kings before the flood. The Egyptians have the followers of Horus. The Greeks remember the age of heroes, and the Hebrews remember the Nephilim and the mighty men of old. So same.
Yeah, so we find it with Hesiod. Hesiod refers to the great kings of the golden age, the age of Kronos.
Yes.
And he mentions that after their death, the spirits of these kings were actually the diamonds of Greek tradition. And this again connects the Sumerian tradition where the genii of these early kings, or the guardian spirits, were in some cases regarded as divine, the Lama or Lamassu, as it is in Sumerian and Akkadian. For example, the Akkadian kings, they were regarded as truly divine, the Lamassu, because their spirits, their guardian spirits or their spirits were regarded as divine. And then we also have the Sedu, or other kind of guardian spirits. Some were on the left hand, some were on the right hand side of these beings or men. I don't know how they know all these things, but anyhow, these spirits were regarded as 2/3 divine. And in the case of Gilgamesh, he was indeed 2/3 divine. And the reason is because his genius were regarded as divine. Remember, he was a descendant of the house of Uruk, and they were descended from the gods. That's why. So this is this early period when the kings were regarded as Nephilim, scions of the gods, and according to Greek tradition, the diamonds of Greek tradition were actually the spirits of these great kings. In biblical tradition, we also find the Shedim, which goes back to the Shedu that I've just mentioned. And in this case, they were usually, especially later on, just called demons. Yes.
Yeah. Interesting. The ancient world believed that humanity had fallen from greatness, and the fact that the Bible says something very similar as well. So there's a linkage.
Yeah.
So really, after studying the Bible, Mesopotamian texts, and Greek literature, do you think these traditions stem from a common historical event, or are the similarities only superficial?
In the Odyssey, we find glimpses of this ancient world, this mythos, that goes back to the Nephilim. So the Nephilim they are not really accentuated in the Odyssey, but without any doubt, as we've discussed, we find remnants of a very old tradition linked to the Nephilim. These traditions are authentic traditions. They were brought from Canaan, from Mesopotamia originally to Canaan, and eventually to the Mediterranean world, and even further into Europe, as I've already mentioned, via the Danau and many other routes, as I discuss also in my third volume. The third book of the Nephilim trilogy is. So I believe it's authentic traditions that we are discussing, and that we find in the Odyssey. Yeah.
So do you think I can comfortably say that the Bible is actually the interpretive key that allows us to understand a lot of what's been sort of surfacing in these myths and mythologies?
Yeah, so the Bible doesn't say a lot. There are only two places in the Bible where reference is made of the Nephilim, Genesis 6 and in Numbers 13. So we don't find a lot of information in the Bible about them. But what is interesting is the Bible did not originate in isolation. The Bible came from a world, an ancient world, where all the people in that ancient world knew about these things, these traditions, these stories, And we've just discussed Nimrod in the previous episode in great detail, showing how he links up with the Sumerian tradition, and why we should regard him as a Nephilim and so forth. So I think what the Bible does is the only place where we find the terminology Nephilim, the fallen ones. And we've discussed that already in great detail, going back to the ancient traditions about the fallen gods. And standing behind it was actually the fallen gods who came to earth. The seed of Enki that we've just referred to a little bit earlier, the sons of Enki, the Anakim. And these are the origins of the Nephilim, but the Bible gives a particular perspective on them. And we'll find, if we study ancient tradition throughout the ages, as I do in the 9 ages in that little book, we find 2 parallel and opposing traditions. The one is what eventually evolved into the biblical tradition, and the other one is what we find with regard to the Nephilim tradition, which is also a continuous tradition throughout the ages.
That's a great answer, Willie. And for people that have just started following us or are watching this episode or 9 Ages for the first time, I recommend you guys go back and start from the beginning, because we actually build these layers all through the 9 Ages. Any other comment, Willie? Any other final thought?
It's quite interesting to find these equivalent traditions in the Odyssey and relate that to the Nephilim. I think it was an interesting exercise. It was nice to talk about it, yes.
Beautiful, thank you. So guys, thank you for joining us for episode 21 of the 9 Ages. If today's discussion made you look at the Odyssey in a new way, be sure to subscribe, share this episode with a friend, and leave us a review. Ancient history is full of mystery, and together we're definitely uncovering the stories that may lie behind the world's oldest tradition. But before I go, I do have a question for you guys. Do you think the giants and demigods of Greek mythology preserve real memories of the Nephilim and the world before the flood, or are they simply myths that developed independently? Please let us know your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to feature some of your responses in future episodes. And until next time, thank you for watching. See you in the next age.